Hello everyone, and welcome to today's Cision webinar, Team Up with Social Media Influencers. I'm Stacy Miller, one of your presenters for today. During today's webinar, you'll learn how to grow closer to your audience by targeting key influencers, how to identify relevant contacts using the right tools, how to build rapport with social media best practices, and how to get on influencers' radars by engaging across mediums. Before I introduce my co-presenter, I'd like to cover a few quick housekeeping points. There will be a moderated Q&A throughout the webinar, so feel free to use the Questions tab on your webinar panel to submit those questions as you have them, so we can answer them in a timely fashion. We will be recording the webinar and sending out a link to the video along with a download link for the slides afterwards. If you are on Twitter, please feel free to live tweet this session using hashtag CisionWebinar, one word. And with that, I would like to introduce Natalia.
Hi, everybody. Stacy and I are so thrilled to be here today to talk to you guys about how to team up with social influencers. Influencers has been a really hot topic for the last couple of years. So we're excited to share not only some thoughts on how that whole social influencer landscape is shaping up, but also some great practical tips that you can walk away from this webinar thinking about how maybe you can incorporate social influencers into your next PR or marketing or communications campaign. Quick intro about me. I'm Natalia, and I'm the VP of Products here at Cision, and I'm responsible for our flagship PR and social products. My role here is to help set the direction for how to improve our products to meet the constantly changing needs of PR and communications people all around the world. So that includes building the future of news monitoring and content marketing, media relations, influencer marketing. I do a lot of research into what's going on out there, and I talk to a lot of people in our industry to help understand their problems and think through how to best go about solving them through great software. Stacy?
Thanks, Natalia. And for those who don't know me, I'm Stacy Miller. I'm the Senior Manager of Communications at Cision. Here I'm tasked with managing the strategy and execution of media and influencer, analyst relations, social media, and community development, as well as keep up with trends to advise our clients through really great content. So over my 10 years with the company, I've pioneered influencer marketing programs for Cision through social, and that's pretty much the gist of it. So with that, Natalia, it's all yours.
All right, great. So I'm going to talk about the overall emergence of influencer marketing and why it's become such an important part of a company's outreach and communication strategy. And then Stacy, who again lives and breathes this stuff every single day, is going to take us through some really interesting examples of how to effectively implement the influencer marketing campaign. But I think it's important that we start at the beginning because it's going to help give us some context for much of the rest of the conversation through the rest of this webinar. Starting to define not only what is influencer marketing today, but how did we get here? What are some of the overall shifts in the landscape that helped make influencer marketing so important? And how do we know that it's here to stay, not some kind of passing fad? So once upon a time, marketing was quite a bit simpler for marketers, for companies and brands. Marketing was very much what I like to call sort of a one-way push of information out to your audiences. Brands were very much in control of their own message. It was obviously extremely well thought out and positive and polished and articulate. Basically, whatever the brand wanted you to know or think about their products or services, that's what they put out there. And unless you or someone you knew already had direct experience with that product, you pretty much had to rely on whatever it was that the brand was telling you. They were your primary source of information. But technology really started to change all of that. We now find ourselves in this world where so much more information is available right at our fingertips. And it's great for consumers because it helps make us more educated and informed in our buying decisions. But it's also definitely much more of a challenge for brands. That huge amount of information out there, it's no longer just being produced by the brands themselves. There's a huge array of people who are participating in those brand conversations, talking about their products and their services. That ranges from millions of everyday consumers, people who are expressing basic emotions like satisfaction and frustration, ranging all the way to sort of the in-the-know experts, right? The guys who are providing reviews and detailed comparisons and technical specs and other information, and everybody in between. These types of conversations are happening everywhere. I'll tell you that the first place that I go whenever I'm searching for any kind of information on a new product or service or frankly anything, I personally always go to Google. I know a lot of other people, their first stop is social media. They either go ask their friends on Facebook or they go ask total strangers on Twitter, or they go to forums or blogs, a whole wide range of places that they go. So the result of that is that consumers can get a huge amount of information and insight and reviews and detail and that emotion and never actually visit the brand's website or any of their other owned properties, never walk into their store. That means that your ability as a brand to reach that consumer was limited to your ability to reach them through other earned channels, where other people's voices are so much more influential than your own. That's classic word-of-mouth marketing. I trust my friends or my acquaintances or unbiased experts or even strangers. I trust them much more than the brand that's actually trying to sell me something. And I'll give you my favorite example. The last time I went to go buy a car, my very first car, I remember this, I went to the dealership and I, very frankly, I bought exactly what they sold me. Maybe I shopped around a few dealerships to get the best car for the best price or whatever, but that was it. Compare that to the car I bought last year, where I did everything online. All of my research, I read all the reviews, all the comparisons. I did basically everything but rely on what the brand had to tell me. I didn't even go to their websites. I looked at professional reviews, I looked in forums, I read a bunch of blogs. So basically all these different sources, all these different people, experts, non-experts, everybody, rightly or wrongly, they had a huge amount of influence over my decision-making and ultimately my purchase decision. Now, don't get me wrong, these challenges are also huge opportunities for brands. That technology and those changes in consumer behavior are really helping brands to reach larger and more diverse and far-reaching audiences than ever before, but also more targeted and tailored audiences. Right? It's not just about reaching bigger audiences, it's also about reaching the right audiences. But it is also important to understand that you, the brand, talking at your consumers is simply not going to resonate the same way that it used to, which is why it's so important to not just better reach an audience, you need to still be able to compel them to take some sort of action, to do whatever it is that's going to drive success back to your business. Maybe that's a lead or a sale or whatever it is for you. It's great that you can reach them, and yes, some of them will be influenced just by getting that message. But in many other cases, it's more effective to harness the voices of others who they already trust so much more than they trust me. And that is influencer marketing. How can I find the voices who are trusted by my target audiences? How can I harness their influential voice to help power my story to that audience? Again, ultimate goal being compel that audience to take action in a way that I simply may not be able to do on my own. And I'm kind of making a point to talk about how influencers can compel action. An influencer is not just the person with the biggest following, right? If I sell medical equipment, celebrities with their millions of followers are not influencers to my target audience. It's about finding the right people who have the greatest potential to advocate for and drive results back to my company. And in some cases, that can be a pretty small list, and that's okay. Stacy later on is going to talk about how building strong relationships with the right group of influencers can go a long, long way. It's about finding the right influencers with the right audiences that can be the most meaningful to businesses. It's not about reaching as many people as possible and hoping they spread the word even further. It's much more targeted than that. Now, I've been talking about this shift in technology and digital consumption and buyer behavior, but there's another really interesting parallel with influencer marketing that I want to point out here. If you look at Google Trend data, and actually if you haven't, I highly recommend it because it's extremely interesting. If you do a search in Google Trends, you'll find that influencer marketing really only came into our consciousness about 5 years ago. So first question, is this a fad? Best way to think about that is, how did it start? Right? If we can understand a little bit about the insurgents, what made this such a prominent thing in recent years, maybe that'll help us understand how to think about influencer marketing campaigns as a whole. So if you think back to my initial comments on what is influencer marketing, it's that ability to reach those people who can influence their audiences and compel them to take that action on behalf of my company. So just because the phrase influencer marketing didn't come into our lexicon until recently, that doesn't mean that the concept hasn't actually been around for quite a long time. And I'm talking about media relations. And again, this is something that Stacy is keenly aware of and is going to talk about more later in our session. How the same types of tactics that we have for a long time used to build relationships with key media who can help power our story to their audiences, those are very much the same tactics that she uses to find and engage with social influencers today. Influencer marketing was born out of media relations. And in fact, the media is still some of the most influential voices out there. In various tests that we've run internally here at Cision, or when we're compiling top influencer lists to share with our customers around specific verticals or topics, we very often find that media and bloggers rank really highly amongst the top influencers on those topics. Media and bloggers are hugely trusted as a source of information. And that means that influence is present not just inside the pages of their newspaper or magazine or blog, but also that their presence and voice and their sort of ability to compel action in social media is so influential. A quick sort of personal story on this front. Years ago, I worked in product at the Washington Post. And this was at a time when the newsroom was really struggling to understand digital and social and all of these new online behaviors. At the time, the reporters who were most effective on social media actually taught classes to the rest of the newsroom. And it wasn't just about how to post links to their stories. It was also about how to engage with their audiences and encourage continued participation. They'd, on the front end, maybe source story ideas, publish their articles, and then even continue the conversation going on those topics after the article had already been published. So they're keeping the whole thing going and building a community, building their influence on that topic. And this was years ago. So the media, by and large, has had a good amount of time to figure out this new digital world and user behavior. So you better bet that they are still highly influential when it comes to reaching and impacting their target audiences. Again, not just in the pages of their regular outlet, but in social as well. So hopefully by this point, we've painted a pretty reasonable picture of why influencer marketing has become such an important part of the campaign toolkit. But I don't just want to stop at the big picture. I also want to look at some of the reported numbers on the impact of influencer marketing campaigns, because these will really help highlight some of the direct value and benefits of influencer marketing that it's driving back to businesses. This one is probably my favorite, and we talked about this one a little bit earlier on. I'm actually kind of surprised it's not even a higher percentage. 92% of people trust recommendations from individuals, even if they don't know them, over brands. That's incredible. A brand's goal is to sell me their products or services. So if you think about it, of course they're going to compare themselves more favorably against the competition. of course they're going to position themselves as being the right solution to my needs and tell me what I need to hear to make the buying decision go their way. And it's not in a dishonest way, but that's their business. So in contrast, my neighbor or my friend or that stranger on Twitter, that expert on that forum, whoever it is, they've had experiences of their own with that product or service, and they don't have the same kind of horse in the race as the brand. So 92% of people trust those recommendations from strangers over those whose entire business is to sell them that product or service. Makes sense to me. Okay, so let's also move beyond the initial purchase decision. This one is really interesting. Customers who are acquired through word of mouth have a 37% better retention rate. And when we read that study, that one was attributable to the fact that you were building more of a relationship with those customers than if you'd acquired them through traditional channels. Basically, that relationship building had more of a lasting impact on how they perceived your brand or your product even after they'd purchased it. Okay, next, 47% are influenced in their purchases by social media. That's actually a huge number when you think of how many people are just passive participants in social media. We're not just talking about millennials here. This is 47% overall. So while there are lots of online channels where your buyers are being influenced by other people's voices, social is obviously a highly important piece of that puzzle. And I think last but not least, 81% of marketers who have used influencer marketing judged it to be effective. Okay, this is probably actually the most telling statistic we have. Not every company defines success the same way. These could be anything from soft measures to hard conversions or anything in between. But it is telling that 81% found their campaigns to be effective. So let's look at some of those common campaign goals, because they can be pretty wide and varied. I'm going to pick on a couple, not sort of go through all of these. A couple really interesting ones. First one being brand awareness. So we talked a lot about how influencers are important for how they can help you better compel action from your audiences. But even hearing about your brand from someone that they trust can have a lasting impact on brand awareness and perception. Remember, that buying decision-making process, that whole thing is much more complicated now. There's many more touch points. So it's very valuable to work with influencers to reach new audiences who maybe even aren't at all familiar with your brand or your products. That way you can make sure that you're at least part of the consideration set when they're even starting to make those buying decisions. And then another really interesting one on here to me is damage control. This is a great example of how influencers can be anyone. Some of the best influencers to help you do damage control are existing customers, right? Really highly satisfied advocates of your products and your brand. You may not think of them as traditional social influencers, but they have a really important perspective and a trusted voice to share. So regardless of whether it's that kind of customer or a bigger industry influencer, they absolutely can impact public and consumer perceptions when you need it most to do that damage control. So building strong relationships with them helps you have that kind of advocate in your corner when something goes wrong. So before I kick it back over to Stacy to talk about some practical tips and tricks, let me wrap up with some final thoughts on the overall benefits of aligning your brand with influencers. First, increasing your reach. You are probably already using a lot of other channels to get your story to the right audience. Maybe traditional media relations, content marketing and distribution, social media. But with so many channels online today, you can't possibly hope to reach everyone. So influencer marketing can really help have that multiplier effect on your reach. You're able to get your stories and your content out to not only your own audiences, but through those influencers, you can get it out to their audiences, folks who otherwise you wouldn't necessarily be able to reach with your message. Next, credibility. We hear this every year with the Edelman Trust Barometer and the Word of Mouth Marketing Association. People trust people like themselves, and that's not ever going to change. When you hear recommendations and conversations and opinions from peers instead of brands, that increases trust and credibility, and ultimately the likelihood that they'll purchase your products or services. Remember back a couple slides, that stat of 92% of people trusting recommendations from people over brands. It lends a lot of credibility when those are the voices they're powering your brand. And number 3, cutting through the noise. There is a lot of information flowing at people online constantly. So people are getting better and better at self-filtering out the junk, all of that spam and the self-promotion. Actually, Stacy told me this great story about how her friend Mark Schaefer called it infobesity, which I think is perfect. We are so bombarded with branded messages and ads that consumers are paying less and less attention to all of it. It's like banner blindness for information. So if you want to reach out to them and impact them, you need to find the sources that they still listen to and trust. So to help get your messages to break through to that consumer, nurture those influencer relationships and rely on those influencers to pass on their thoughts and recommendations. So with that, let me kick it back over to Stacy.
Thanks, Natalia. So you've done an incredible job of setting us up with the why. So now it's time to talk about the how. How are we going to implement influencer marketing within our businesses? So the first question you probably have is, how do I know who to target? Who are my influencers? Where do I find them? So the first thing that you should do is figure out how to target influencers based on the following factors. How deep is their involvement in your industry? Are they a broadcaster of news? Are they a commentator? Are they a conversationalist? Do they engage with other people? How loyal and dedicated are their following? Notice I didn't jump immediately to how many followers they have, because like Natalia said earlier, that's not always an indicator of influence. Look at how often they're talking about the topics that are related to your brand or your industry, and how often they influence conversation and engagement from their networks. Bonus points if they're an original content creator. So there's someone, again, who's influencing what other people think, who's sharing original ideas. And here's a pro tip. Target influencers that aren't involved with other brands already. We think of influencer marketing, and I'm sure we have some questions on this already. Sometimes influencer marketing, people think of it as celebrity endorsements. But it can be really hard to get those A-listers, those people at the top of the totem pole, so to speak. My tip there is to target influencers that aren't involved with other brands already, because they'll dedicate more time to you if you engage with them, and they'll harness the opportunity more than another influencer who may have multiple brands vying for their attention. So look for the up-and-comers rather than the A-listers to start. All of that criteria that I just mentioned is really important to helping find the right influencers. So once you do that, you should create a working roster that you can continually return to over and over again, and focus your efforts on the contexts that are really the most important to your brand. My good friend Michael Smart, you may have heard him on a previous webinar, he recommends dedicating 80% of your efforts to the top 20% of your media list. So once you've figured out who you want to target, now is the time to do your research and learn everything you can about these contexts. Again, it's very akin to media relations. Put your PR hats on, right? Monitor them on social. Keep an eye on their activity, their share of voice, and what the topics they're currently covering. And then you should segment your lists of influencers based on what your goals are. So location, if you're looking for influencers that are local to you, audience demographics, so who you're trying to reach, or by topic, so maybe there's multiple topics or subtopics that you're looking to break into. Segment those lists. And then make sure that your database and your lists are updated continually. I recommend, every couple of months at the least to include the most accurate and up-to-date information, because influencers can often change focus or occupation. They move to another industry, or they get more focused on a certain industry, and then you need to make sure that they're still a relevant contact for your programs, much like media relations. So this next slide, I really think you're going to love. Feel free to screenshot it, whatever you need to do. But I wanted to give an example based on some of the industries that we kind of have really frequently attend these webinars. And, what do influencers look like? Who are they? And how do I know that they're relevant? So if there are any nonprofits on the webinar, I recommend Beth Cantor. She's worked in the nonprofit sector for over 30 years, and she's really kind of dedicated her career to answering the question of how nonprofits can leverage online technology for social change. If you're in the finance industry, Karen Price Muller, she's a money and consumer writer in New Jersey for several different media outlets, and she's the founder of a really, really popular type of money help website. Andrew Kelly, he's an influencer in education. So he's a resident scholar and director for the Center on Higher Education Reform. And he provides analysis and commentary on higher education issues, so he's really important. Robert Scoble, many of you have probably heard of him. Robert Scoble has been around for a long time in the tech industry, and he's historically known for startups and innovative companies and the role. He's really a futurist, but he's now ingrained in the world of virtual reality and augmented reality, and he wants to see the deep technology changes that are affecting our universe. This is really, really interesting stuff. Paul Tunna, he's an influencer in pharma. He runs a website called Pharma Forum that provides a digital podium for communicating innovation within the pharmaceutical industry. Anne Tran, if you're in the travel industry, is a great example of an influencer. She's a really respected social consultant, a travel writer, and an influencer, and she helps brands like Architectural Digest and Marriott understand how to use the power of digital media to build their businesses and provide better hospitality. For real estate, if you're in the real estate industry, Anton Stetner, I highly recommend. He does real estate over in Washington State, and he's one of those guys that really advocates for feeding the content beast, and he shows other real estate people how to create content that gets them more business. And then finally, if you're in the retail sector, Nicole Rayleigh is the founder of Retail Minded. She's the author of Retailer 101, and she's created a conference called the Retailer Conference, and she's extremely influential in the retailer space. So I hope some of these examples were really helpful in kind of giving you the scope of what influencers look like and kind of where to start. So the next question you probably have is, how many influencers do I target? So I recommend focusing on a few key contacts that match the criteria that I talked about earlier, especially if you're just getting started creating an influencer relations program. So start with a small pilot group, maybe 5 to 10 people, and then figure out an engagement schedule that works for your goals. So some brands engage daily, some weekly, some monthly. Figure out what you can scale based on the number of influencers that you want to put in your program so that when you expand it, you can keep them engaged for a longer period of time. And then the next part of influencer relations is really learning to understand them. So who are they? What do they do? What do they do daily? Who do they talk to daily? What are their favorite things? Who do they talk with? It's, again, akin to media relations, understanding the most about them, what they talk about, when and where, so that you can start developing a relationship and building rapport. Now, building rapport, being besties, is probably one of the most important parts of influencer relations, again, much like media relations, because influencer marketing isn't a one-off tactic. You need to consistently nurture and stay in contact with your influencers. So my recommendation here is to keep in touch by adding really thoughtful insights to their posts, not just, I agree, or cool, like awesome. No, add really thoughtful insights and comment on their work, share their work, provide data, provide opportunities, and show that you take a genuine interest in what they're doing. It's really simple. The ability to kind of stay on their radar so that your brands remain top of mind is crucial. So the more visibility you can get by interacting with them, the better. So if you have a social media platform, some sort of CRM that can really help you monitor their activity and then engage with them on a really consistent basis. And when you build rapport, once you're ready to engage with them, they can ask for an influencer marketing program. They'll be more likely to collaborate with you. I mentioned earlier about creating an engagement schedule. And again, this is very simple, and you have to figure out what's really right for your brand and how many resources can you dedicate. I recommend engaging with influencers daily, just like you would research and read your favorite reporters daily that are your target audience or your target reporters. You should be engaging with your influencers daily through social media. And it doesn't have to be only through social media. Offline interactions are just as effective. So for example, we just came back from social media marketing world, and we love talking to all the social media influencers, all the influencers in content marketing, and we make sure that when we go places, we foster those relationships, and we just make sure to say hi, give them a hug, shake their hand, ask them how they're doing so they can connect with you and keep that relationship alive. So create a schedule where you carve out time to comment, repost, like, target any type of content that the influencers are creating and engage on it to stay top of mind. And don't stop talking once you feel like your influencer has seen you or recognized you or noticed you or maybe even started engaging with some of your stuff. Your influencers are speaking up on social, they're speaking up offline, and so are their followers. So it's important to keep managing the relationship as often as you can. So while engagement may be unfolding on one specific platform, and I think we have a question in the Q&A box on platforms that I'll answer later, don't limit your reach by relying on just one audience to spread the word. So for example, if there's a topic that's trending on Twitter, you could add a Periscope live stream to bring an extra real-time element to the discussion. Look for opportunities to harness the content that's being created by the influencers in conjunction with your brand and help spread it even wider. So you can use social listening tools to analyze what's being said about your brand and the influencer, which of their followers are joining the conversation, which could also be more influencers to add to your program, and then how you can target them if they have similar opinions. You'll also really want to look at the difference in conversations that's happening on each platform because people interact on different social media platforms in different ways. So followers on Facebook or Instagram might be posting and replying to long, detailed comments, while those on Twitter might be talking in GIFs, right? That's the new thing. So just be prepared to create shareable content, mobile-friendly content to keep the conversation going and personalize messages that you have with your influencers. I think I have a little bit of time to talk about tracking influencer marketing a little bit later, but one point I want to make sure that I make in case we run out of time is that make sure to track the impact of influencer marketing with UTM codes on all of the links that you share in your campaigns. So that way you can say, hey, these influencers drove this much traffic to this content, or these influencers provided a spike at this time of day during this event, and you can really see how those efforts are paying off. So with the right resources and the right time, this is the gist of it. This is all you need to do. So I want to go through some fun best practices and some examples of great influencer marketing and building an influencer program. So this is an example of what we do at Cision, and one of our good friends, his name is Jeff Barrett. He is one of our influencers. He's a really smart guy. He talks a lot about brand strategy, and as an influencer, we've invited him to contribute content to our site and to be featured, and you can do the same. Influencers are a great way to get new perspectives on ideas that are related to your brand's industry. So as you can see, we asked Jeff to do a guest post on our blog. We have visualized some of Jeff's great quotes and anecdotes into visuals for social media that get shared, and that increase our reach. And we've even started recording video tips with Jeff because multimedia and video is such a trend nowadays, and people want to see people behind the camera in real time and who they are and what they do to get a stronger connection with them. So best practice number one is to invite influencers to contribute content to your sites. Second best practice is to be human and do one-on-one things that show appreciation. So when an influencer or advocate talks about you, it's a really great and simple best practice to send a handwritten note or token of appreciation in the mail to create an extra special connection. At Cision, we call them surprise and delights. And so Michelle Jubin, our social media manager, when she sees someone who is engaging on our content and is really excited and sharing things and helping increase our reach, we put them into a budding influencer program, and she does a little sleuthing, and we kind of find their address or where they work, and then we send them a little handwritten note, and we just say thank you. And it makes a huge impact because it helps increase that one-to-one, that human-to-human connection that makes them feel like they're attached to your brand. The next tip is to do things for influencers without asking for anything back. So here, this is an example. We have a really great relationship with Brian Sillis. He is one of the most visionary minds in marketing and PR and customer experience. If you're not following him, you should. Brian writes many books, excellent books. And so when we knew that Brian was having a book launch at South by Southwest, we said, hey, you guys need to go to South by Southwest. If you're there, go check out Brian's book. Attend these. Go get a free copy of Brian's book. It's amazing. And then Brian did a partnership with PayPal, and he was signing books at another event. We said, hey, Brian Sillis is at this event. This is your chance to go get some great knowledge and meet someone wonderful. And there was nothing in it for us, absolutely nothing in it for us. He didn't ask us to do it, but we did it because we wanted to support him. So if you find influencers, promote something that they're passionate about to help them reach their goals. So that way they're more likely to engage with you and do the same. It's really genuine and it's really authentic. Another great best practice is to keep your influencers, once you've put them in your program and you know these are the people that you want to engage with, to make an impact, keep them ahead of the game and inform them of new initiatives before others know about them to help increase loyalty. So I think of it as the video game beta testers whenever they get released. I'm a gaming nerd, if you couldn't tell. So keep them ahead of the game. Inform them of new things that are coming out before they're even there. People love that behind-the-scenes exclusive VIP access. It makes them feel like a rock star. So if you have a new product or upgraded features, if you're looking to test messaging, if you want to get feedback, try to pilot these programs with influencers beforehand. You can let them know that it's private. And when you tell them, hey, we're looking to get feedback on something, we're doing this with a really select group of our community or our family, they get super excited. And then as a result, you'll get really great feedback. They may generate some content for you, and then they'll help exchange content with you, thus further increasing your reach. So at Cision, we do quite a few of these, and you might have noticed that there's kind of a common thread when we talk about media relations and influencer marketing, right? And it's to always foster that one-to-one connection. So I mentioned phone calls, emails, in-person meetings are great. If you're traveling and you're going to a conference, ask your influencers to meet you. But obviously one way to connect with influencers, no matter where they are, is via social. So think of a traditional media relations strategy through social. Transfer those components to influencer marketing. So engage with them daily, as I said earlier, mentions, comments, shares, likes. Add to the conversation or ask them questions. Invite them to a Twitter chat. Highlight them on your social media accounts. Doing this on a consistent basis will increase the likelihood that they'll respond. And so here's another pro tip. Stroke their ego. People love being recognized and feeling like they're a part of something bigger. So we've been doing this recently. It's part of a new strategy where we use our influencer marketing software to find the top influencers for really large national events. So we've done social media monitoring through Cision software for the Oscars and the Super Bowl and the Golden Globes and Super Tuesday and the election, and we publish these lists of the people who are most influential based on their following and their reach and their engagement and their interactions through this algorithm that our software does. So we publish these lists, and they generate ginormous amounts of engagement and traffic to our website because we're recognizing these folks for doing what they do, and we're sharing their work. So we found that Perez Hilton was the top Golden Globes influencer, and we tweeted that, and he shared it, and that got tremendous reach. He was so jazzed to be put on this list. And then the top 10 Super Tuesday influencers, the same thing, the Oscars. It's a really interesting tactic to find out, who they are, what they're doing, and recognize them and just get on their radar. So the way I like to think of it is that social media is really steroids for influencer programs, so to speak. So some other great examples here. Dunkin' Donuts used to do this. I'm not sure if they do anymore, but they did a really popular Fan of the Week campaign on social media. And people who love Dunkin' Donuts would share photos of them drinking Dunkin' Donuts in their car at their wedding, or even getting a Dunkin' Donuts coffee tattoo. Yes, that is real. And they post it all over their social media accounts, and it remains their profile photos for a week. So for a week, that person is a star to hundreds of thousands of followers. Again, giving recognition to the people who admire and advocate for your brand the most is a simple place to start. Another option, this one from Instagram, from e.l.f. or Eyes, Lips, Face Cosmetics, they find people who use their products and then highlight them on their Instagram accounts. So whereas this person, who might not be influential, would have taken a picture and say, oh, I love this e.l.f. eyeliner, e.l.f. took that and then reposted it to their follows and elevated that person. It's really simple, but really effective. Another really great example, Jeep runs a really excellent influencer relations program, and a couple years ago they called me and they said, hey, you talk about Jeeps a lot, which is true. And what they did is they put me in an influencer program with 10 or 12 other influencers from around the nation, and they flew us out to NAIAS, which is the North American International Auto Show, to be Jeep correspondents. So at the show, they were launching these new Jeep products, and they said, hey, why don't you come report on these products for a day as one of our influencers? And we said, heck yeah. So they flew us out. We got to I'm talking to the CEO of SRT, Ralph Gilles there. The next photo is Jason Peck and I talking to one of the designers of the Jeep Patriot. And we got to conduct these really intimate interviews and learn more about the product. And then when we got home, even during the conference, and when we got home, we were so jazzed about everything. We went out and we talked about Jeep, and we talked about the new products, and we got people excited about the new things that they were releasing. And that was exactly the goal of their program. Another great example comes from Ford. This is my friend Eric Tung. They take it a step further, and they find the people who talk about Ford and love Ford the most on social media based on their social media monitoring and analytics, and then they send the brand new cars to these people to drive them for a week. How incredible is that? But one thing I want you to keep in mind is that it's not always about spending a lot of money for influencer relations, right? Okay, maybe you can't send a car to someone for a week, or you can't fly someone to your company to take part in it, but you can ask them to participate in a contest. You can ask them to share content. You can do all of those things and still make impact with your programs for people who are interested in your brand and your industry. Another great example comes from NASA. This is my friend Carrie Gorgone. She's a space nerd as well, and they flew her out for the Orion flight test a couple of years ago. So she got to go and watch the launch, which I think actually didn't end up happening, but she got to meet the astronauts and check out the site, and it was a tremendously it was a very fun experience for her, but it allowed her to go out and talk about NASA's most important initiatives, which was the goal of their influencer program. So I think that's a really, really, really excellent idea. The last kind of example I have here is something that we did in one of our influencer programs a number of years ago. And you probably remember the merging of Cision and Vocus and all of our wonderful family of brands. What we did in order to kind of boost the awareness of the whole brand merger was to take our influencer list and during the holidays send a simple thank you. So we wrote like a poem, Christmas song. We all signed it with our names, and we bought a piece of like a food item from every city that our brands were headquartered in. So from Chicago, we got Garrett's Popcorn, and from London, we got tea, and DC, we got Mambo sauce, and we put it in this great gift basket, and we sent it to all of our influencers. Not because they particularly did anything that month, but because they were a part of our community, because they were engaging with our content, because they were help spreading awareness and help and they were helping to share the story of our products. And that's all we did, and we sent it out to them, and it was super simple, and we got overwhelming feedback, we got overwhelming traffic, and we got inquiries about our products and services from people who hadn't heard of the merger before. That's effective influencer marketing. So to kind of wrap up here, and we're going to get to Q&A with Natalia, I want to talk about a couple don'ts of influencer marketing. So we talked about the why, we talked about the how, we got some great examples. So let's talk about some don'ts. So please, please, please don't treat influencers like commodities. Influencers are people, and at the core of these programs shouldn't be used. So treat them as valuable friends, and they will do the same in return. The second don't make an ask right off the bat. Just like media relations, nurturing and holding relationships for a period of time really ensures the success and reciprocity of influencer programs. The third don't is don't forget to disclose to your audience if you're compensating an influencer for their time or content. Not doing so could get you in trouble with the FTC. So the FTC regulates advertising and native advertising, and there's a lot of controversy on how disclosure is given for pieces of content that are paid and how it's shown. And influencer marketing has come under a bit of scrutiny because when you see these people advocating for brands, if you're paying for them, you have to disclose it. Otherwise, you could get in trouble. A great resource for that, if you're curious about it and you're paying influencers or considering paying influencers, is this really simple infographic from Carrie Gorgone. Again, shout out to her. She's a law expert, and when this came about, she is kind of at the forefront of all of this. So if you want more information on should you include a disclosure, how does it all work, am I going to get in trouble for this, how should I make sure that I'm abiding by the rules, check her out. There's a URL there, and I'm sure we'll also tweet it out. So with that, I believe it's time to get into questions. But right before we get into those, I'm going to pop this poll that we have. If you'd like a demo to see how Cision Social Edition can help you engage with influencers, we'd also like your feedback on this webinar and the topics presented here, so we could use that for webinars in the future. So the first question, give me just here, is from Andrew. And it is, would you recommend any specific social media platforms for engaging with influencers? Natalia, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I've talked to actually a lot of different sort of agencies and companies about this specific question. And the thing that comes back most often is that it really depends entirely on the campaign and your goals and your brand and the audiences that you're trying to reach. Right, some social networks are clearly more sort of visual in terms of content types and things like that, and you're reaching different audiences, and you can do different levels of targeting depending on the social network. So you really just need to start to think through, start with almost who's the audiences that you're trying to reach, and then where's the best way to reach those types of audiences and through which network, and then you can find the influencers that will help you get to those audiences most effectively.
Absolutely, and there's so many different networks out there and emerging networks as well. I know for some it can be overwhelming to figure out, okay, which networks, how many networks. I think a rule would be to start with one or two, never more, so that way you can really focus in on your efforts. So the next question comes from Meg, and I believe she's saying, does that number change if they're affiliated through a brand, through an ambassador program, or sponsored by them like an athlete? So I believe this question is relating to the 92% of people believe recommendations. So do they believe them if they're paid? I haven't seen any specific research on that, but I'm sure that there is. I would gamble and say that it's just as effective because it's still the people, they're paid for their time, but they're not paid to give a certain opinion. Ethical brands shouldn't go out to influencers and say, hey, I'll pay you if you put a positive review on this. And I said ethical brands, right? Not all brands may abide by that. That's my best practice for you. If you're going to pay an influencer, it's not for something positive. It should be you're compensating for them for their time, but their thoughts are their own. What do you think, Natalia?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And it's a really interesting question about how that number might slice and dice depending on different sort of factors or verticals or things like that. That's something we can look into, and maybe we can post some more information on our blogs or tweet it later if we can find some more information on that.
Absolutely. Let's see. Brandon would like to know what UTM codes are. Natalia, do you want to take that one?
I'm actually going to let you take that one if that's cool with you.
Sure. So UTM codes, they're a way to track your URLs. So let's say your site is www.brandonmeller.com, and you want to direct people there, but you want to measure that impact from influencers. And you give your influencers a specially tracked link with these UTM codes. So the link would then be www.brandonmeller.com / and UTM source equals influencer number 1. And if you just Google Google Analytics tracking code, it'll show you exactly how to build those URLs. Cision Software does this as well. And that way in Google Analytics, instead of just seeing organic traffic to brandonmeller.com, you would see that the traffic came specifically from influencer number 1, influencer number 2, influencer number 3, depending on how you tag them. So you can figure out precisely which influencers are giving the most impact to your campaigns. And that's just one of one of the metrics that you can use for influencer marketing. We have a couple questions, Natalia, here. Several of them actually about qualifying the influencers and what the criteria are. I know I talked about it a little bit. Can you talk a little bit about what you think great criteria is and maybe a little bit about how Cision ranks criteria?
Yeah, sure. I think one of the best things to do, again, sort of starting with the audience and trying to identify who are they reaching. And that can be a pretty tough question to answer on your own. I mean, just sort of looking through somebody's Twitter stream, you don't necessarily know how their sort of demographics and geographics and other sort of interests and tastes of their audiences are sort of rolled up and aggregated. So actually that's one area where software does help in a lot of ways, because it helps you make quick sense and quickly visualize who are the audiences that are most impacted by that particular influencer. That to me is a great place to start in terms of qualification, because that way you understand if you're really trying to reach a certain demographic or a certain region in the country and that person's audience doesn't match, then that's your first key that that's probably not the best person to go after. Even if they're influential on that topic, if that's not their audience makeup, then I would not start there with my campaign.
That's great advice. The next question comes from Katie, and that is, what is the line of reaching out to influencers and sounding desperate or overly branded? I love this question because it really drives home the point of keeping those one-to-one human interactions. You shouldn't create a list of people that you think are influential and then kind of reach out to them immediately and say, hey, do you want to advocate for my brand? Or hey, do you want to enter a partnership? It doesn't quite work like that, right? So, take the steps, take the time to learn about them, to share their content, to get involved in their world, and be helpful first. We talk about all these tactics through social media, and I think as marketers and communicators, we have really great goals, but sometimes we forget about the heart of social media is to be social. It's talking to someone else. So we have to put in the time to create that relationship, support their initiatives before you ever make an ask. Do you have anything to add to that, Natalia?
Yeah, you gave that really great example earlier about how often should I be reaching out to each of my influencers. And you said once a day. And I think that's a really telling example of how it's really about building a relationship. Like you said, it's not I'm reaching out, cold calling and saying, hi, here I am, cover my stuff. It's really about understanding them and building a relationship and a rapport and being a part of their community that will ultimately make them more likely to be a part of your sort of influencer programs, rather than sort of just approaching them cold and hoping for the best and hoping to not sound desperate, as you put it.
Yeah, absolutely. The next question comes from Audrey. I love this question. is it common to ask media and influencers to share a link with a UTM code? And how should we discuss the fact that we measure their influence for our brand with them? So my kind of tip for that, so UTM codes and the tracking of campaigns, I wouldn't have that be like your very first campaign with an influencer, and I'll give you kind of an example. At Cision, we run influencer programs, and we cultivate relationships with really great people in the industry over a number of years. One of the campaigns we did was after we had taken relationships and nurtured them for some time. It was to attend a conference, and we said, hey, we've had a really great relationship with you. You know, we appreciate you sharing our content and the awareness and the engagement and helping us build our community. We want to pay you back, and here's how we'd like to pay you back. We're allowed to give out, you know, a certain number of free conference tickets. We can't give them to everybody, but we'd like to give you a shot at it. So if you can help us increase our reach for the conference by sharing these tracked links, we'll track how much traffic you send to the conference page, and you know, the top couple of people who get us the most traffic and awareness for the conference will get you a free ticket. So that's how we were able to kind of work in, okay, so we'd like to track your interactions, which, you know, when you're starting a relationship with someone can feel a little too branded. And then, you know, it helps us measure exactly what's happening, but then they understand why we're measuring it because we're trying to create an impact, but then we were also rewarding them for their efforts with something that they were really interested in. It looks like we have time for just another question or two. So the next question comes from Nadia, and that is, how do you compensate influencers? So at Cision, I don't think we've ever actually compensated influencers per se. If there was something like a webinar or a piece of content, original content, I mean, that's strictly monetary, as in a partnership, but there's other ways to compensate influencers other than money. So you can think about things and experiences as well. So giving them an experience with your brand, inviting them to your office. It depends really on your brand and your industry. Sometimes the exchange of communities is compensation. So as you learn who the influencers are and you realize that their thoughts and their ideals align with what your brand is trying to communicate, and you say, hey, we'd love to, you know, put you up on our blog or have you contribute. We have a community of X amount of people, and that could then increase your reach. For influencers who are interested in that, and you'll know that based on your interactions with them, to them that is compensation because then they're getting more awareness and they're being elevated. So remember earlier when I said don't go for the A-list influencers first and go for the up-and-comers. Those are the ones that are like really hungry and the ones who want to be these people who are influential, who are backed by a brand, and who are building something, whether it's for their brand or if it's for personal gain. So offering something to them, not monetary, but that benefits them, whatever their interests are, I think is a good idea.
Yeah, and I'll add to that to say that the folks that we've talked to, there are influencers out there who ask for some level of compensation, or some companies that offer it, and so it is becoming a more present part of the influencer marketing landscape. But as Stacy said, there's plenty of other ways to sort of incentivize and build relationships, mutually beneficial relationships with these influencers outside of direct compensation.
Definitely. I think we're going to take one more question before we wrap it up here, and that comes from Simon, and that is, what are your thoughts on influencers having official representation when brands do connect? And I'm assuming that means that that person is like an official, like branded influencer for a long period of time, like T-shirts, gung-ho, name on their profile type representation is how I'm interpreting that. And I love that idea, but there's pros and cons to it. So there are brands that have ambassador programs, and they allow the influencers to kind of brand themselves and represent the brand. If you do go that route, I think it's important to talk to your legal team, talk to your communications team, and make sure that they're abiding by your branded standards and they're not going to go out and misrepresent your brand, because then you're crossing over into like the crisis communications realm, right? So we don't want them to go out and they're wearing your brand's t-shirt and they go and they say something that's totally misaligned and doesn't represent you, but they are because they're wearing your t-shirt or they've got their logo on your profile. So it's not uncommon to just create a specific set of rules that says, hey, if you're going to use our logo on your website, if you're going to use our logo on your blog or say that you're an advocate or whatever, like, abide by these simple rules and just make it, like something simple, like 3 to 5 rules, like, our ambassadors talk about this. Our ambassadors never talk nasty about competitors and X, Y, and Z. So that way the line is very clear to them how they can and can't kind of interact. The other kind of, I guess, coin to that is sometimes you get influencers and they just blow up, which is really beneficial for your brand. So some brands, they'll pay for people who are really influential in the industry to come on and be evangelists for the brand, which is really great. It helps you get crazy reach. You have someone that's kind of all your own that other brands won't get. The caveat to that is to just be careful with the influencer's size and just other opportunities that may come around. That influence won't last forever. Influencers often change industries. They get other interests. Maybe they focus in on a subcategory. So just make sure that you're open and you're honest with your influencers on what your goals are. Ask them what their goals are so that they can achieve it as well before you ever bring someone on officially. And with that, it looks like we are at the top of the hour. So I'd really like to thank all of you for attending. Please thank Natalia for her wonderful, wonderful knowledge. I hope it was really helpful. You can find an archive of all of our webinars on our website at cision.com. Additionally, excellent research and slides from past webinars, including this one, can be found on SlideShare. That's slideshare.com/Cision. And of course, you can find us on Facebook and Twitter. We are Cision, a leading global media intelligence company serving the complete workflow of today's communications, social media, and content marketing professionals. Cision also represents the Gorkana Group, PR Web, Help a Reporter Out, and iContact Brands. Again, thank you all for joining us.